Hey brother! Jay, last week we were so excited to tell a story that just filled in so many problems and so many questions we had with Toy Story. Today's video is going to build off of last week's video, so first we need to address the elephant in the room. He's actually a rhino, not an elephant, and I don't know how he snuck in here. Ah, Reginald. But 48 hours after last week's video went live, it was noticed by somebody at Pixar, like the director of Finding Nemo and WALL-E, Andrew Stanton, one of the original Pixar Brain Trust members. So that wasn't very helpful to our cause. Man, this was just as bad as the time J.K. Rowling tweeted us. Apparently your heroes don't like it when you change their stories. But whether or not this is official Pixar canon, or if Joe Ranft ever told anyone else at Pixar, or if they ever even had a conversation to decide this backstory at all, I personally genuinely believe that one day Joe Ranft sat down with his friend Mike Mozart and told this story. At the end of the day, even if there is nothing on screen to confirm it, there's also nothing on screen to deny it. So I think even if this is just a fond memory of a conversation between Mike and Joe, I think it's a story worth telling. Especially when it ties together everything so perfectly. Gosh, is anyone else kind of hoping that Toy Story 4 is actually a prequel? You know what? I hereby lobby for Toy Story 4 to be renamed to Toy Story, wait for it, B4. Gosh, how amazing would that be? The answer is amazing, times infinity. And beyond. Anyway, I bring it up because Andy's dad's backstory is not the only story Mike had. Today we are going to be discussing the backstory of Al's Toy Barn and the other Pixar secret it helps reveal. So last week we mentioned a little bit about Al's backstory and how he actually bullied Andy Sr., but today we're gonna go a little more in depth. Apparently Al's father used to own a huge expanse of farmland and was the richest man in town and even employed Andy's grandfather. But you can also see a lot of rural themed decor, which yes, I get that like Andy is really into cowboys and all, but would you really decorate the entire house that way? I can tell you from personal experience, my parents were not all that willing to help me convert our house into a working replica of Hogwarts. Not that I didn't try. Couldn't figure out the staircases. But you probably would decorate the house that way if you lived in a very rural area and worked on a farm all day. But back to Al. Sadly, when he was a little boy, his mother died and his father tried to fill the void with stuff, aka spoiling him with lots and lots of toys. This again makes sense in the future when we now see Al is a toy salesman and collector. But there was of course one toy that Al was never able to lay his hands on, and that was Woody. Much like Andy's father, he too loved Woody's Roundup and participated in the Cowboy Crunchies cereal promotion to receive his own, but obviously never did since Andy Sr. received the only one. This made young Al extremely jealous of Andy Sr., and according to Mike, he even tried to steal Woody from Andy once.
Now, Andy has a toy he does not have and can never get. There's a lot more at this point where he describes this scheme he does to try to steal Sheriff Woody from Andy.
After Al grew up, he inherited the family farm, but decided not to continue his father's legacy and slowly sold off the land little by little.
When he inherited his father's estate, Al started selling it off around the family barn where the giant dairy business this guy had.
The only remains of the family farm is the barn itself, which he now runs the toy store out of, and even if you look carefully, you can see that it looks older than the buildings surrounding it. There's even rust on the roof. And the kicker that helps tie the whole thing together is Al's penthouse apartment across the street. This really does help clear up a lot if you think about it, because why is there a barn in the middle of the city, and how is Al able to afford the penthouse apartment when his business is failing? And in case you're thinking, who says it's failing? We actually do get a couple of hints in Toy Story 2. First, when Barbie talks about how Buzz Lightyear dolls were under-manufactured.
Back in 1995, short-sighted retailers did not order enough dolls to meet demand.
And then clearly way overstocked by Al, who doesn't seem to be selling very many of them. And then of course there's Al's overwhelming desire to sell his entire Woody's Roundup collection just for the money. And then finally at the end of the movie we see his closeout sale where everything is a According to Mike, the inspiration for this story came from the book The Little House, which tells the story of a tiny house that was alive, that lived out in the middle of the country, that slowly had a city built up around it until at the end of the book, the house was actually physically removed from the city and placed back out in the countryside. Now, while this story totally fits with Al's story, if you're like me, this probably also reminds you of another Pixar movie. This story almost perfectly describes Up. I mean, it's almost literally what is happening to Carl in the beginning of Up, which got me thinking, what if it is exactly what is happening to Carl in the beginning of Up? What if Carl's house rests in the same city as Toy Story 2? What if his house lives on the old land that used to be Al's father's? Except, is there anything to connect the city in the two movies, or Toy Story and Up? Yes, there totally is! When we see Carl floating up out of the city, we see him go by this little girl's room, who, by the way, has a Luxo ball and a Lotso Hugs bear, but that's not the connection. The connection is the little girl who actually attends Sunnyside Daycare in Toy Story 3. So that means Al is selling his land to none other than By and Large. Actually, this is all really starting to make sense. When we see Carl and Ellie get married, we see Ellie's family, and most of them look like farmers, which they probably would be if all of the land that they lived on at that point in time was the farmland that Al's father owned. So Ellie's family could have been friends with Andy's grandparents because Andy's grandfather worked on the same farm. And Emma Jean! There is finally a connection! For years, we have wondered why and how Andy has a postcard on his bulletin board written to Carl and Ellie from someone named Emma Jean. And in case you are less familiar, this postcard can also be seen on Carl and Ellie's mirror in Up. And we even asked Pete Docter, director of Up, about this specific postcard before.
Emma Jean was a relationship that Carl had before his wife, but it turned out fine. Emma Jean and Ellie became good friends, so it was all good.
But we never learned why Andy would have it. But what if Emma Jean is Andy's grandmother? I mean, according to Mike, Andy grew up in his grandmother's house, so it makes sense that he would be sentimental about her and want to have something from her on his bulletin board. Plus, the timing works out that she could have been the same age and friends with Ellie, and I could totally see Carl giving it to Andy, like, hey, here's a postcard your grandmother sent us once. I thought you would like to have it. I think that was a pretty spot on impersonation of Carl, by the way.
No.
Yep, dead ringer. That makes sense. Andy's grandparents worked on the same farm as Ellie's family. That's the connection between the families. And we know it was the same farm, Al's family farm, because we see that Carl and Ellie's house grows up to be surrounded by city, just like Al's barn. And it has to be the same city because this little girl in Up is also in Sunnyside Daycare in Toy Story 3. Man, who would have thought the two biggest mysteries in Toy Story, Andy's dad and Emma Jean, would have the same answer? And once again, I have to give a huge shout out to Mike Mozart for sharing his story with us, and I don't care what anybody says, I believe it is an incredibly touching story and it just fits so well. And if you would like to see our full interview with Mike, it is available on our Patreon on the exclusive feed, just click the card. Also on that feed, after every video, we kind of do a Q&A discussing how we came to decide on that particular theory, the problems that we ran into, just the general creation and troubleshooting of a certain topic. So if you'd like to check it out, please go look at our Patreon. And guys, for my question of the day, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you believe we finally have the answer to the mystery that is Emma Jean? Please leave your thoughts in the towel section down below. And guys, as always, thanks for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to see some more Toy Story action from us, you can click right here to see Emma Jean revealed, or right here to see the true story of Andy's dad. But Jay, that's all I've got for you today, man. I will see you on Tuesday.